The gunshot echoed across the parched Montana grasslands, and Bethany Sinclair dropped to her knees between the two groups of armed men. Her hands raised high as she shouted in Lakota, then English, begging both sides not to fire again. It was July 1876, just weeks after news of Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn had reached Miles City, and the air itself felt ready to ignite. Bethany had lived in this tension her entire 22 years, the daughter of a Scottish fur trader and a Lakota woman who had died bringing her into the world. Her father had raised her between two worlds, teaching her English and commerce, while her mother's people taught her their language and ways during the summers she spent with them. Now those two worlds stood 50 yards apart on the open plain, rifles raised, and she was the only thing keeping them from slaughtering each other. "Tell them to lower their weapons," commanded the cavalry lieutenant, a young man with a sunburned face and trembling hands. "We're here on orders from Fort Keogh." Bethany turned to the small group of Lakota hunters, her mother's cousin among them. "In their language," she said, "he says they come from the fort. They are afraid. The one who leads them is barely more than a boy." Her cousin, a man named Elk Running, studied the soldiers with hard eyes. "They are all boys, boys with guns who kill our women and children." "These particular boys have not," Bethany said carefully. "I know this lieutenant. He guards the supply wagons. He has never ridden against the people." She turned back to the lieutenant, switching to English. "They are hunters. They have 3 deer. They are going home to their families who are hungry because your army has driven the buffalo away from their hunting grounds." The lieutenant's jaw worked. Behind him, 15 soldiers sat on nervous horses, fingers on triggers. The situation was a powder keg, and Bethany felt sweat that had nothing to do with the summer heat trickling down her spine. That was when she heard the horse approaching from the east, coming fast. She turned to see a lone rider, and her heart sank when she recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette. Matthew Brooks, the cowboy who had been watching her with those steady gray eyes every time she came into Miles City for supplies. He reined his buckskin gelding to a stop 20 feet from the tent standoff, taking in the scene with a quick, intelligent glance. Matthew was 26, a ranch hand for one of the big cattle operations that had started spreading across Montana territory in the past few years. Bethany had spoken to him perhaps 3 times, brief exchanges at the general store, but each time she had felt something stir in her chest that she tried hard to ignore. "Lieutenant," Matthew said calmly, never taking his eyes off the Lakota hunters. "Those men have deer, not weapons pointed at you. Your men have rifles aimed at folks trying to feed their families." "Stay out of this, Brooks," the lieutenant snapped. "This is Army business." "This is Montana Territory business," Matthew replied, his voice level but carrying an edge of steel. "And I'm Montana Territory through and through." "Miss Sinclair, what are they saying?" Bethany blinked in surprise that he was addressing her, that he was treating her as someone with authority in this situation rather than an obstacle or a curiosity. "They want to go home. They are not looking for a fight." Matthew nodded slowly. Then he did something that made Bethany's breath catch. He dismounted, handed his reins to no one in particular, and walked directly between the two groups until he stood beside her in the middle of that deadly no-man's land. "Tell them," he said quietly, his voice for her ears only, "that I give my word as a man who has lived on this land for 8 years that these soldiers will let them pass if they lower their rifles first. Tell them I stake my life on it." Bethany stared at him. "You cannot promise that." The lieutenant did not agree. "The lieutenant is scared and young and doesn't want to die today," Matthew said, finally looking at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her bones. He will agree because it is the only way everyone here gets to see tomorrow. Trust me." There was something in his voice, in the set of his shoulders, that made Bethany believe him. She turned to Elk Running and translated Matthew's words, adding, "I think he speaks truth. I think he is a man of his word." Elk Running studied Matthew for a long moment. "You trust this white cowboy?" Bethany surprised herself by answering, "Yes." The Lakota hunter nodded slowly, then spoke to his companions in a low voice. One by one they lowered their rifles, though they did not put them away. Bethany translated this to the lieutenant, with Matthew's eyes on her the entire time. "Your turn, Lieutenant," Matthew called out. "These men are going to walk away with their deer and go feed their families. Your men are going to lower their weapons and let them pass. Then everyone here gets to go home and sleep in their own beds tonight." "I could have you arrested for interfering," the lieutenant said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You could try," Matthew agreed, "or you could make the smart choice." The young officer looked at his men, at the Lakota hunters, at Bethany and Matthew standing together in the middle of the field. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Lower weapons. Let them pass." The tension bled out of the air like water from a cracked bucket. The Lakota hunters moved slowly, gathering their horses and their game, never turning their backs on the soldiers. Elk Running paused as he passed Bethany, touching her shoulder briefly and speaking in their shared language. "You did well, little cousin. Your mother would be proud." Then they were gone, melting into the landscape like smoke, and the soldiers were turning their horses back toward the fort, the lieutenant throwing one last resentful glance at Matthew before riding away. Bethany and Matthew stood alone in the middle of the trampled grass, the summer sun beating down on them. She realized she was shaking. "You should sit," Matthew said, and before she could protest, he had spread his coat on the ground despite the heat, gesturing for her to settle on it. "I am fine," she said, but her voice wavered. "You are brave as hell," Matthew corrected, "but that does not mean you are not allowed to shake after standing between two groups of armed men ready to kill each other. Sit down, Miss Sinclair, please." The please did it. Bethany sank onto his coat and Matthew crouched beside her, pulling a canteen from his saddle and offering it to her. She drank gratefully, the water sun warmed but wet. "How did you know they would listen to you?" she asked finally. Matthew shrugged, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his coat. "I did not know. I hoped. The lieutenant is new, shipped out from Illinois. He is scared of everything that moves out here, but he does not want blood on his hands. And your people, they looked like hunters, not warriors." "Hunters want to go home, same as anyone." "They are not my people," Bethany said automatically, then winced at how that sounded. "I mean they are, but so are the people in Miles City. I am both. I am neither. I am." "You are Bethany Sinclair," Matthew said simply. "And you just saved probably a dozen lives by standing in the middle of that field and making both sides see each other as human beings. That is who you are." She looked at him properly for the first time, this cowboy who had inserted himself into a deadly situation because he thought it was right. His face was tanned from years of outdoor work, his hands calloused, his clothes dusty from the trail. But his eyes were kind, and when he looked at her, she did not see the confusion or suspicion she so often encountered from white settlers, or the subtle disappointment she sometimes felt from her mother's people, who thought she was too white to truly understand their ways. "Why did you help?" she asked. Matthew was quiet for a moment, looking out across the plains. "My father brought me out here when I was 18, he said finally. "From Pennsylvania. He wanted to start fresh after my mother died. We bought a small ranch south of here, just the two of us. The first winter, we were not prepared. Did not know the land, did not know how harsh it could be. We would have starved if not for a Lakota family who shared their food with us, taught us how to survive. My father learned enough of their language to say thank you. It was one of the last things he said before he passed that spring. I am sorry, Bethany said softly. It was 8 years ago, Matthew said. I sold the ranch, hired on with the big cattle outfits, learned the land my father wanted to love but never got the chance to know. And I learned that out here, we are all just trying to survive. The people who make it are the ones who remember that we are all human, regardless of what we look like or what language we speak. He turned to look at her directly. That is what you do, is it not? You help people remember that. Bethany felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. I translate, that is all. You do more than that, Matthew said. I have heard about you, Miss Sinclair. The woman who speaks between the fort and the tribes, who keeps the peace in Miles City when tensions run high, who makes sure both sides understand each other. That is not just translating words, that is translating hearts. No one had ever put it that way before. Bethany felt something unlock in her chest, some tight knot she had been carrying for years. The army does not like that I work for both sides, she admitted. And my mother's people do not always trust me because I live in town, because my father was white. Sometimes I think I am helping, and sometimes I think I am just delaying the inevitable. The inevitable is not always what we think it is, Matthew said. What happened today, that was not inevitable. Those men could have killed each other. They did not, because you stood between them and made them see another way. He paused, then added quietly, You are the bravest voice I have ever heard. Bethany's breath caught. The way he said it, with such simple conviction, as if he were stating an obvious fact like the sky being blue or grass being green, made her believe it might be true. I should get back to town, she said, standing up quickly, suddenly overwhelmed. My father will worry. Matthew stood as well, shaking out his coat and shrugging it back on despite the heat. I will ride with you. These are not safe roads for anyone alone, especially not today. Bethany wanted to protest that she had ridden these roads alone 100 times, but the truth was that her hands were still shaking, and the thought of Matthew's steady presence beside her was more appealing than she wanted to admit. They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, their horses walking side by side on the dusty trail that led back to Miles City. The town was new, barely 4 years old, built around the confluence of the Tongue and Yellowstone rivers. It had sprung up to serve Fort Keogh and had grown rapidly, as cattle ranchers and homesteaders flooded into the territory. Bethany's father had been there from the beginning, running a trading post that served both settlers and the few native people who still came to trade. Your father is Duncan Sinclair, Matthew asked, breaking the silence. You know him. Everyone knows Duncan. He is a fair man, that is a rare thing. Matthew glanced at her. He must be proud of you. Bethany smiled despite herself. He worries constantly. He thinks one day I will stand between the wrong two groups and get shot by both sides. It could happen, Matthew said matter-of-factly. Does that scare you? Yes, Bethany admitted, but what scares me more is not trying. If I do not speak, if I do not try to help people understand each other, then what is the point of being caught between two worlds? I might as well be nothing but an inconvenient reminder of a union that both sides would rather forget. Matthew reined his horse to a stop so suddenly that Bethany had to circle back to him. When she did, she found him staring at her with an intensity that made her heart race. Do not ever say that about yourself, he said, his voice rough. You are not caught between two worlds. You are a bridge between them. And bridges are the most valuable things there are, because without them, people are just stranded on opposite sides of a divide, staring at each other across a gap they cannot cross. Bethany felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "You do not know me." "I know enough," Matthew said. "I know you stood in a field today and risked your life for people on both sides. I know you speak with a voice that makes men with guns put them down. I know your eyes are the color of honey in sunlight, and I know I have wanted to talk to you properly for 6 months, but could never find the courage because you are so far above a simple ranch hand that it seemed ridiculous to try." The confession hung in the air between them. Bethany felt like the world had tilted on its axis. "I am not above anyone," she managed. "I work in my father's trading post. I translate for whoever needs it. I am nobody special." "You are wrong about that," Matthew said simply. He urged his horse forward again, and they continued toward Miles City, but something had shifted between them. Some door had opened that neither of them seemed willing to close. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the sun was lowering in the sky, painting the rough wooden buildings in shades of gold and amber. Miles City was a rough frontier town, all wide dirt streets and hastily constructed storefronts, saloons and supply shops, and the constant traffic of soldiers from the fort, cowboys from the ranches, and the hopeful homesteaders still streaming in despite the dangers. Bethany's father was standing outside the trading post when they rode up, his weathered face creased with worry that smoothed into relief when he saw her. Duncan Sinclair was 53, tall and lean with graying red hair and the permanent squint of a man who had spent decades facing into the wind and sun. "Beth," he called, using the shortened name he preferred. "I heard there was trouble out on the North Road." "There was," Bethany admitted, dismounting, "but it was resolved peacefully." Duncan's sharp eyes moved to Matthew, assessing. "Thanks to you, Brooks." "Thanks to your daughter, sir," Matthew said, tipping his hat. "I just backed her play." Duncan snorted. "I doubt that is the whole truth, but I will take what I can get. Come inside, both of you. You look like you could use something cold to drink, and I want to hear what happened." The trading post was a large, sturdy building that smelled of leather and tobacco, coffee and sawdust. The front room was lined with shelves of goods, everything from rifle ammunition to bolts of cloth, penny candy to farming tools. In the back, Duncan kept a small office and living quarters that he and Bethany shared. Duncan poured them each a cup of cold water from the well and listened intently as Bethany recounted the standoff. Matthew added details here and there, but mostly he let her tell the story. When she finished, Duncan was quiet for a long moment. "The lieutenant will report this to his superiors," he said finally. "They will not like that you interfered, Beth. They have been tolerating your translation work, but after Little Bighorn, attitudes have hardened. They want revenge, not understanding." "I know," Bethany said quietly. "But what was I supposed to do? Let them kill each other?" "Of course not," Duncan said, reaching over to squeeze her shoulder. "You did the right thing, you always do. I just worry about the cost." "The cost of doing nothing would be higher," Matthew said quietly. Both Sinclairs turned to look at him, and he met their gazes steadily. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Sinclair, but your daughter is doing important work. Hard work. Dangerous work. But it is work that needs doing, and she is maybe the only person in the territory who can do it." Duncan studied Matthew for a long moment, then a slow smile crossed his face. "You are Duncan Brooks's son." Matthew blinked in surprise. "You knew my father, met him once, that first winter you both were here." "He came to the old trading post I ran before this one, looking for advice on surviving the cold. I sent him to the Lakota camp south of here, told him they would help if he approached with respect." Duncan's smile turned sad. "I heard he passed that spring. I am sorry. He seemed like a good man." "He was," Matthew said simply. "You have his look about you," Duncan said. "The same straight spine, the same eyes that see people instead of categories. He glanced at Bethany, then back to Matthew, and Bethany could practically see the wheels turning in her father's head. "Will you stay for supper, Matthew? It is the least I can offer after you helped keep my daughter safe today." Matthew hesitated, glancing at Bethany. She felt her heart hammering, torn between wanting him to stay and being terrified of what it might mean if he did. "I would be honored," Matthew said finally, and Bethany felt a smile tug at her lips despite her nervousness. Supper was simple: venison stew and cornbread that Bethany had made that morning, but it was good, and the conversation flowed easily. Duncan asked about the ranch where Matthew worked, and Matthew described the vast stretches of grassland where thousands of cattle now grazed, the bunkhouse full of cowboys from every background imaginable, the hard work of riding fence lines and breaking horses and driving herds to market. "It is not what my father envisioned when we came west," Matthew admitted. "He wanted a small spread, a quiet life, but I like the work. I like being on the land learning it, and I like the men I work with. We have cowboys from Texas and Mexico, an Irish fellow from Boston, a freed slave from Louisiana who is the best horseman I have ever seen. Out here, none of that matters as much as whether you can do the work and keep your word." "That is the best of the West," Duncan agreed. "The idea that you can be judged by what you do instead of where you came from. Of course, it does not always work that way." "No," Matthew said, his eyes finding Bethany's across the table. "But people like your daughter are working to make it true more often than not." After supper, Duncan excused himself to go over inventory ledgers, leaving Bethany and Matthew to clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, Bethany washing dishes in a basin while Matthew dried and stacked them. The domesticity of it felt strangely intimate. "Your father is a good man," Matthew said as he dried the last plate. "He is the best man I know," Bethany replied. "He loved my mother very much. When she died, he could have sent me away to be raised by her people and started a new life. But he kept me, raised me himself, made sure I knew both sides of my heritage. It has not always been easy for him, a white man with a half Lakota daughter in a place where many people do not understand or accept such things. It is their loss," Matthew said firmly. "You are remarkable, Bethany Sinclair." The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. She set down the dish she was washing and turned to face him properly. "Why are you saying these things?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew set down the towel and took a step closer to her. "Because they are true. And because I have been watching you for months, trying to work up the courage to speak to you properly. And today, when I saw you standing between those armed men with your hands up and your voice steady, I realized that I could not wait anymore. Life is too short and too uncertain out here to waste time being afraid." "Afraid of what?" Bethany asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Afraid that you would not feel the same way I do," Matthew said. "Afraid that a woman like you, brave and beautiful and necessary, would have no interest in a cowboy who smells like horses and leather and whose greatest skill is mending fence lines." Bethany felt something inside her give way like a dam breaking. "Matthew, I have been watching you too. Every time you came into the trading post, every time our paths crossed in town. I have been watching and wondering and thinking it was impossible because you are so confident and capable, and you belong here in a way I have never quite felt I do." Matthew reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and the touch sent electricity racing up Bethany's arm. "Then maybe we have both been foolish," he said softly. "Because I see you, Bethany. I see how you move between worlds with grace, how you speak with a voice that carries the weight of both your heritages, how you risk everything to keep the peace. You belong here more than anyone I know, because you understand all the different pieces of this territory and how they fit together." Bethany felt tears slip down her cheeks, and Matthew lifted his free hand to gently brush them away with his thumb. "I am scared," she admitted. "Scared that this cannot work, that our worlds are too different, that people will not understand." "Let them not understand," Matthew said. "I do not need anyone else to understand as long as you and I do." He leaned in slowly, and Bethany rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Matthew's lips were warm and soft, and he tasted like coffee and cornbread and something that was uniquely him. When they broke apart, Bethany was breathless. "I should probably ask your father's permission to court you properly," Matthew said, his voice rough. Bethany laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "My father already knows. He saw it before either of us said anything. He is not subtle about these things." As if summoned, Duncan cleared his throat from the doorway to his office. "Matthew, a word before you head back to the ranch." Matthew squeezed Bethany's hand once more before releasing it and following Duncan into the office. Bethany could not hear their conversation, but she saw through the partially open door how Duncan spoke seriously, and Matthew listened intently, nodding. When Matthew emerged a few minutes later, he was smiling. "Your father has given me permission to call on you," he said. "If you are agreeable." "I am very agreeable," Bethany said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. Matthew left shortly after, promising to return in a few days when his work allowed. Bethany stood in the doorway of the trading post and watched him ride away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening sky. "You could do worse," Duncan said from behind her. "I know," Bethany replied, leaning back against her father. "I could do much, much worse." The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Bethany continued her translation work, helping negotiate trade agreements between the fort and various tribal groups, interpreting disputes between settlers and native hunters over grazing lands, and maintaining the delicate balance that kept Miles City from exploding into violence. Matthew came to call whenever he could get away from the ranch, sometimes staying only long enough for a brief conversation and a stolen kiss behind the trading post, other times joining Bethany and Duncan for supper, and spending the evening talking by lamplight about everything and nothing. They learned each other slowly, carefully. Bethany told Matthew about growing up caught between two cultures, about the summers she spent with her mother's people learning to tan hides and gather roots and speak the language that her mother had never gotten to teach her. She told him about the winters in town, about the school teacher who had tried to beat the Lakota out of her until her father had intervened, about the loneliness of being the only child who looked like her in a settlement of white faces. Matthew told her about Pennsylvania, about the farm his family had lost when his mother died, about the decision to come west and start fresh. He told her about learning to rope and ride, about the first time he had helped with a cattle drive and thought his body would never stop aching, about the men he worked with who had become like brothers. They also learned each other's dreams. Bethany wanted to establish a proper school in Miles City that would teach both English and Lakota, that would welcome children of all backgrounds. Matthew wanted someday to have a small ranch of his own again, nothing too big, just enough to work with his own hands and maybe raise a family. "Would you want that?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the trading post, watching the stars come out. "A ranch, I mean. Or would you rather stay in town?" Bethany considered carefully. "I think I would want both. A place outside town, but close enough that I could still help when needed. somewhere with enough space to breathe, to raise children who could run free and learn both worlds the way I did." She paused, then added quietly, "Is that something you think about, children, with you?" Matthew asked, his voice rough. "Every day." It was fast, Bethany knew. They had been courting for barely a month. But out here on the frontier, time moved differently. Life was uncertain, and people learned quickly not to waste time when they found something real. In early September, tensions escalated again. A group of young Lakota warriors, angry about the continued encroachment on their lands and the broken promises from the government, attacked a small homestead south of Miles City. 3 settlers were killed, including a woman and her young son. The town exploded in fury. There were calls for retribution, for the army to hunt down the warriors responsible and hang them. Bethany heard talk of riding out to the nearest Lakota camp and burning it to the ground in revenge. She stood in the middle of the main street and shouted for calm until her voice was hoarse, but for the first time, people were not listening. The crowd was too angry, too hurt, too ready for blood. That was when Matthew appeared, riding in from the ranch with a dozen other cowboys. He pushed through the crowd to Bethany's side, and the other ranch hands formed a loose circle around them, creating a barrier between her and the angry mob. "Listen to her," Matthew called out, his voice carrying over the noise. "She is trying to help." "Help who?" someone shouted back. "The savages who just murdered the Patterson family." "Help everyone," Matthew shot back. "You think killing innocent people in revenge makes you any better than the men who attacked that homestead? You think burning down a village full of women and children brings back the Pattersons?" "They are all the same," another voice yelled. "No," Bethany said, finding her voice again. "They are not. The men who did this, they are criminals, murderers, but they do not speak for all Lakota people any more than every white person speaks for you. There are men at Fort Keogh right now who committed atrocities during the war. Does that mean we should hang every soldier?" "That is different," someone protested. "Why?" Bethany demanded. "Because you understand the language they speak. Because they look like you," the crowd stirred uneasily. Bethany pressed on, her heart pounding. "I know you are hurting. I know you are scared. The Pattersons were good people, and what happened to them was evil. But responding with more evil will not stop the cycle. It will only make it worse. What do you suggest?" "Ask the town's mayor, a portly man named Henderson who had been one of the loudest voices calling for retribution." "Let me go to the camps," Bethany said. "Let me speak to the tribal leaders. They do not condone what happened any more than you do. Many of them are trying to keep their young men from doing exactly this kind of thing. Help me help them find the men responsible and bring them to justice properly." "Indian justice is not real justice," Henderson scoffed. "Then we bring them to the fort for a military trial," Bethany said. "But we do it the right way, without killing innocent people in the process." The crowd was still angry, but the immediate fury had cooled somewhat. Matthew kept his position beside Bethany, a solid, unwavering presence. "The lady makes sense," one of the other cowboys said, a lean Mexican man named Carlos. "My family came from Chihuahua. I have seen what happens when you start deciding whole groups of people are guilty for the crimes of a few. It never ends well." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. Henderson approached Bethany, his face troubled. "You have 3 days," he said. 3 days to find these men and bring them in. After that, I cannot promise I can hold people back." "I understand," Bethany said, even though 3 days felt impossibly short. As the street emptied, Matthew turned to her. "I am coming with you." "No," Bethany said immediately. "It is too dangerous. If my mother's people see me bringing white men with me, especially cowboys, it could make things worse." "I do not care," Matthew said flatly. I am not letting you ride into a situation like this alone. Matthew, please understand. I do understand, he interrupted, taking her hands in his. I understand that you are about to ride into multiple camps of people who have every reason to distrust you, to try to convince them to hand over their own warriors to white justice. I understand that you will be putting yourself in danger from both sides. And I understand that I love you and I will not sit safely in town while you do this alone. The declaration stopped Bethany cold. They had not spoken those words yet, though she had felt them building between them for weeks. You love me, she whispered. Desperately, Matthew said. Completely. So much that it terrifies me. And that is why I am coming with you, Bethany, because a world without you in it is not a world I want to live in. Bethany felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too, which is why I cannot ask you to risk your life like this. You are not asking, Matthew said gently. I am offering. There is a difference. In the end, Bethany could not dissuade him, and she was not entirely sure she wanted to. They left at dawn the next morning, along with two of Bethany's cousins from her mother's people who had agreed to escort them as a sign of safe passage. The first camp they visited was a small group of families camped along the Tongue River. The leaders there were horrified by the attack on the Patterson family and swore they had no knowledge of it. They promised to send word through the network of camps to help find the men responsible. The second camp was larger and more hostile. Some of the younger warriors shouted at Bethany, calling her a traitor, a white man's woman who had forgotten her mother's blood. It stung because part of her feared they were right. Matthew stayed close but said little, understanding instinctively that his presence needed to be passive, non-threatening. But Bethany was aware of him constantly, the steady anchor of his presence keeping her grounded. It was at the third camp that they found what they were looking for. An older woman, a grandmother whose face was seamed with sorrow, approached Bethany and spoke in rapid Lakota. My grandson was among them, she said. He is 19, angry, has been listening to the warriors who say we should fight until every white person is driven from our lands. I tried to stop him, but he would not listen. Now he has blood on his hands, and I do not know how to save him from what will come. Bethany knelt beside the old woman, taking her weathered hands. Where is he? North, in the breaks along the river. There are 4 of them hiding. They know the town will want revenge. They are talking about fleeing to Canada. If they run, it will be worse, Bethany said gently. The army will hunt them, and they will die fighting or be hanged without trial. But if they come in, if they surrender and face justice properly, there is a chance for mercy. Not a good chance, but a chance. The old woman's eyes were full of tears. They are boys, foolish, angry boys who listen to the wrong voices, but they are still boys. I know, Bethany said. Help me find them. Let me talk to them. It took the rest of the day, but with the grandmother's help and the guidance of Bethany's cousins, they tracked the young warriors to their hiding place. Matthew insisted on coming right up to the edge of the camp, though Bethany made him promise to stay behind with their horses while she approached alone. The 4 young men were indeed boys, the oldest barely 20. They were huddled around a small fire, their faces hard and scared in equal measure. When they saw Bethany approaching, they grabbed their rifles. Do not come closer, one of them shouted in Lakota. We know who you are, the half-blood who works for the whites. Bethany stopped but did not retreat. I work for peace, and right now peace means you coming back with me to face what you have done. So the whites can hang us, another spat. No, we will die fighting if we must, but we will not let them put nooses around our necks. You killed a woman and a child, Bethany said, not flinching. You killed people who had done you no personal harm, people who were simply trying to live on land they believed was legally theirs. You have committed a terrible crime, and yes, you must face justice for that." "White justice," the first warrior said bitterly. "Human justice," Bethany corrected. "Murder is murder regardless of who commits it. Your own people would judge you harshly for killing a woman and child. You know this." The boys looked at each other, uncertainty creeping into their eyes. The youngest one, barely 18, looked like he might be sick. "I did not mean to," he said quietly. "The child, he ran in front of me. I did not mean to shoot him." "But you did," Bethany said, her voice firm but not unkind. "And now you have two choices. You can run, and the army will hunt you down like animals and kill you without mercy. Or you can come back with me, surrender properly, and have a chance at a real trial. I cannot promise the outcome will be good. But I can promise I will speak for you, tell them you surrendered willingly, that you are taking responsibility." "Why would you do that?" the oldest warrior asked suspiciously. "Why would you help us?" "Because I am tired of death," Bethany said simply. "Because every person who dies in this conflict is someone's son or daughter, someone's beloved child. Because I believe in justice, real justice, not revenge. And because if we keep killing each other, there will be nothing left of any of us but blood and bones and hatred." The words hung in the air. The young warriors looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, the oldest one lowered his rifle. "We will come," he said. "But if the whites try to hang us without a trial, we will fight. We will die fighting." "I understand," Bethany said. "I will do everything in my power to make sure you get a fair hearing." The journey back to Miles City took 2 days. Matthew rode beside Bethany, the 4 young warriors between them and Bethany's cousins bringing up the rear. It was tense, the possibility of violence humming just beneath the surface, but they made it without incident. The town erupted when they arrived. People poured into the streets, shouting, demanding immediate justice. The warriors looked terrified, their earlier bravado crumbling in the face of the mob's fury. Matthew and the other cowboys formed a protective circle again, keeping the crowd back while Bethany negotiated with Mayor Henderson and the fort commander. In the end, it was agreed that the 4 young men would be held at the fort until a proper military tribunal could be convened. It was not perfect, but it was better than a lynching, and Bethany counted it as a victory. That night, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, she sat on the porch of the trading post with her head in her hands. Matthew sat beside her, not speaking, just present. "I am so tired," Bethany said finally. "Tired of being in the middle, tired of trying to make people see each other as human. Some days I think it is impossible." "Some days it probably is," Matthew agreed. "But today was not one of those days. Today you brought 4 men in for justice instead of letting them be hunted down and killed. Today you showed both sides that there is a way forward that does not involve more bloodshed. That matters, Bethany." "Does it?" she asked, looking at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Because it feels like for every small victory there are a dozen defeats. People are still dying. The hatred is still growing. Maybe I am just delaying the inevitable." Matthew took her face in his hands, gentle but firm, making her look at him. "Listen to me. You are doing important work, hard work, work that most people do not have the courage or the skill to do, and yes, it is exhausting. Yes, it feels impossible sometimes, but you are saving lives, Bethany. Real lives. That old grandmother, she will get to see her grandson again because of you, even if it is just to say goodbye properly. The Patterson family, they got justice without more innocent people dying. That matters." "I could not do it without you," Bethany admitted. "These past few days, knowing you were there, it made all the difference." "Then I will keep being there," Matthew said simply, "for as long as you will have me." Bethany leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her exhaustion and fear and love into it. Matthew responded in kind, his arms coming around her, holding her close. When they broke apart, Bethany whispered, "Marry me." Matthew pulled back, his eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me," Bethany repeated, stronger this time. "I know it is fast. I know we have only been courting for a few months, but life out here is uncertain and I do not want to waste another moment. I love you, Matthew Brooks. I love your steadiness and your courage and the way you see me, really see me, for who I am. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and face whatever comes together. So marry me." Matthew's face split into a wide grin. "Yes, absolutely yes. Though I feel like I should have been the one to ask." "Why?" Bethany challenged. "Because you are the man." "Fair point," Matthew conceded, laughing. "All right then. Yes, Bethany Sinclair, I will marry you. I will marry you tomorrow if you want." "Let us give it at least a week," Bethany said, grinning despite everything. "I should probably have a dress." They were married 10 days later in a small ceremony outside the trading post. Duncan gave Bethany away, tears streaming down his weathered face. Bethany's cousins attended, along with the cowboys from Matthew's ranch, and a surprising number of townspeople who had come to respect Bethany's work. Even a few officers from the fort showed up, including the young lieutenant from the standoff that had started it all. Bethany wore a dress that combined white lace with Lakota beadwork, a physical representation of her dual heritage. Matthew wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving his bride. The vows were simple, spoken in both English and Lakota. Duncan officiated, his voice steady as he joined their hands and pronounced them husband and wife. When Matthew kissed his bride, the crowd cheered, cowboys and soldiers and Lakota witnesses, all united for one brief, shining moment. They spent their wedding night in a small cabin on the ranch where Matthew worked, borrowed from the owner for the occasion. It was simple but clean, and for the first time in weeks, Bethany felt like she could breathe. Matthew was gentle with her, patient and careful as they learned each other's bodies. There was awkwardness and laughter mixed with the passion, whispered words and gasped breaths. Afterward, they lay tangled together under a worn quilt, the Montana night cool through the open window. "I never thought I could be this happy," Bethany murmured against Matthew's chest. "Get used to it," Matthew replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I plan to make you this happy every day for the rest of our lives." It was a promise he worked hard to keep. They moved into a small house on the edge of Miles City, close enough to the trading post that Bethany could continue helping her father and doing translation work, but far enough out that they had privacy and space. Matthew continued working at the ranch, saving every penny he could toward eventually buying a spread of their own. The work did not get easier. If anything, tensions in the territory escalated through the fall and winter of 1876 and into 1877. The Army continued its campaign to force all Lakota people onto reservations. There were more skirmishes, more attacks, more deaths on both sides. Bethany continued standing in the middle, translating, negotiating, pleading for understanding. And Matthew continued standing beside her, a quiet, steadfast presence that gave her the strength to keep going when everything felt hopeless. In January, Bethany discovered she was pregnant. She told Matthew on a cold evening as they sat by their fire, and she watched his face cycle through surprise, joy, and terror in rapid succession. "A baby," he said, his hand moving automatically to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Bethany asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Matthew said, pulling her close. "Terrified, amazed, grateful, but yes, happy most of all." The pregnancy gave Bethany a new urgency in her piecework. She wanted to bring her child into a world that was slightly better than the one she had known. A world where maybe, just maybe, people who looked like her child would be accepted for who they were rather than judged by which half of their heritage people chose to see. She pushed herself hard, maybe too hard. Matthew worried constantly, trying to get her to rest more to let others take on some of the burden. But Bethany could not stop. Every life saved, every conflict diffused, felt like a brick in the foundation of the future she was trying to build. In April, she was called to the fort to help negotiate with a group of Cheyenne who had been caught hunting on land that was now claimed by white ranchers. It should have been a simple discussion, but tensions were high, and the meeting quickly devolved into shouting. Bethany stood between the two groups as she had so many times before, her pregnant belly prominent now, her voice steady as she translated accusations and counter-accusations. She was so focused on the words, on making each side understand the other, that she did not notice the young soldier at the edge of the group raising his rifle. Matthew saw it, though. He had come to the fort with Bethany, staying back as he usually did, but always watching. When he saw the soldier's finger move toward the trigger, saw the barrel starting to swing toward Bethany, he did not hesitate. He threw himself forward, shouting a warning, crashing into Bethany and taking them both to the ground just as the rifle fired. The bullet that would have hit Bethany in the back instead grazed Matthew's shoulder, a burning line of pain that he barely registered. Chaos erupted. The Cheyenne hunters grabbed for their weapons, thinking it was an attack. Soldiers surged forward. Bethany, pinned beneath Matthew, screamed his name as she saw blood spreading across his shirt. It took 10 frantic minutes to restore order, to make both sides understand that it had been an accidental discharge. A nervous young soldier who had never seen combat and whose finger had slipped on the trigger. 10 minutes during which Bethany held pressure on Matthew's wound with shaking hands and prayed to every god she knew that he would be all right. The fort doctor stitched Matthew up, declaring the wound painful but not serious. The bullet had carved a furrow across his shoulder blade but had not hit anything vital. He would be sore for weeks but would heal completely. Bethany sat beside him in the infirmary, tears streaming silently down her face. Matthew reached up with his good arm and wiped them away. "I am fine," he said gently. "We are both fine." "You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me," Bethany said, her voice shaking. "You could have been killed." "But I was not," Matthew pointed out. "And neither were you or our child. That is all that matters." "Matthew, I cannot ask you to keep doing this," Bethany said. "I cannot ask you to risk your life every time I try to negotiate peace." "You are not asking," Matthew said, the same words he had spoken months ago. "I am offering. I love you, Bethany Brooks. I will stand beside you and protect you for the rest of my life. That is not going to change." But something had changed for Bethany. Seeing Matthew bleeding because of her work, feeling the baby flutter inside her as she held pressure on his wound, had crystallized something she had been avoiding. "I cannot keep doing this," she said quietly. "Not like this. Not with a baby coming. It is too dangerous, too unpredictable. I need to find another way." They talked long into the night, Bethany and Matthew and Duncan, who had rushed to the fort as soon as he heard what happened. By morning, they had a plan. Bethany would step back from active negotiation work, at least temporarily. Instead, she would focus on teaching. She would start the school she had always dreamed of, a place where children of all backgrounds could learn together, where the next generation could grow up understanding each other better than their parents had. It was not giving up, Bethany told herself. It was changing tactics. And when the baby was older, when things were more stable, maybe she could return to the direct peace work. But for now, she needed to think about the life growing inside her, about the family she was building with Matthew. The school started small, just a handful of children in a room behind the trading post. Bethany taught reading and writing in both English and Lakota, mathematics, history from multiple perspectives. Some of the white families in town were scandalized, but others saw the value in their children understanding the people they lived beside. Matthew's shoulder healed, though the scar remained, a permanent reminder of the day he had taken a bullet for his wife. He joked that it gave him character, but Bethany saw the way he sometimes touched it absently, and she knew it bothered him more than he let on. Their son was born in September 1877, on a cool evening with the first hint of fall in the air. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Bethany was certain she would not survive it. But Duncan had hired a skilled midwife, a Cheyenne woman named Singing Bird who had delivered hundreds of babies, and between her expertise and Matthew's unwavering presence, Bethany made it through. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Matthew cut the cord with shaking hands. The midwife cleaned the infant and placed him in Bethany's arms, and Bethany felt a love so overwhelming it nearly stopped her heart. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Marcus Duncan Brooks, after Matthew's father and Bethany's. He was a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair that would later lighten to brown. From the beginning, he was curious and determined, traits that would serve him well in the life ahead. The first years of Marcus's life were among the most peaceful Montana territory had seen in a decade. The various tribes were being forced onto reservations, a process Bethany found heartbreaking but could do little to stop. Many of her mother's people ended up on the Standing Rock Reservation in Dakota Territory, though some remained in Montana, trying to adapt to the new reality. Bethany continued her teaching, and the school slowly grew. By 1880, she had 15 regular students, a mix of white, Lakota, Cheyenne, and mixed heritage children. She taught them all the same curriculum, refusing to separate them or treat them differently based on their backgrounds. Matthew had saved enough to buy a small ranch, 200 acres of good grazing land south of Miles City. It was not the empire some of the big cattlemen were building, but it was theirs, bought with hard work and careful planning. They built a modest house with room to grow, and Matthew began building a herd. Marcus grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and asked endless questions. Bethany taught him both English and Lakota from infancy, and he switched between them as easily as breathing. He was fascinated by his heritage, demanding stories about both his grandfathers, about the Lakota people and the Scottish traders and the cowboys who had tamed the wild frontier. In 1882, Bethany gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Lily Margaret Brooks. Where Marcus was all energy and questions, Lily was thoughtful and quiet, observing the world with solemn eyes. She adored her older brother and followed him everywhere, much to Marcus's mixed delight and annoyance. Duncan was in his 60s now, slowing down but still running the trading post with the same fairness that had defined his life. He doted on his grandchildren, teaching Marcus to track and hunt, showing Lily how to identify different plants and their uses. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. The great conflicts of the 1870s had given way to a more subtle tension, the slow, grinding process of cultures colliding and trying to find ways to coexist. Bethany's school became an accepted part of Miles City, no longer scandalous but simply the way things were done. But peace in the West was always fragile. In the spring of 1885, when Marcus was 7 and Lily was 3, trouble erupted again. A group of young Lakota men left the reservation without permission, frustrated by the terrible conditions and broken promises. They were not looking for a fight, just trying to hunt and live the way their fathers had, but the army saw them as a threat. Bethany was called to Fort Keogh to help negotiate their peaceful return. She hesitated, remembering the bullet that had nearly killed Matthew years earlier, but the fort commander assured her it was a low-risk situation. Just talking, he promised. Just helping them understand that they needed to go back to the reservation peacefully. Matthew wanted to come with her, but one of their horses had gone lame, and they had a buyer coming that afternoon. Bethany assured him she would be fine, that she would take Duncan with her for safety. It was a short ride to the fort, a simple conversation, and she would be home before supper. She should have known better than to trust promises of safety. The meeting at the fort started calmly enough. The Lakota men, 8 of them ranging in age from 19 to 40, were willing to talk. They explained their grievances, the inadequate food rations, the disease running rampant on the reservation, the inability to live as they had always lived. Bethany translated their words carefully, adding her own observations about the conditions she had seen on her rare visits to the reservations. But the fort commander was under pressure from Washington to be tough on what they called hostiles. He refused to negotiate, demanding unconditional surrender and return to the reservation. The Lakota men, feeling betrayed, began to leave. That was when someone, no one was ever sure who, fired the first shot. Bethany threw herself flat as bullets started flying. Duncan covered her body with his, protecting his daughter as he had protected her all her life. The fort erupted into chaos, soldiers scrambling for cover, the Lakota men returning fire as they tried to escape. It was over in minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 soldiers were wounded, one seriously. 3 of the Lakota men were dead. The other 5 had escaped into the surrounding countryside, and the army was preparing to hunt them down. Bethany and Duncan were unharmed physically, but Bethany was shaking so badly she could barely stand. They rode back to the ranch in stunned silence, and when they arrived, Matthew took one look at Bethany's face and gathered her into his arms. "I am done," Bethany said that night, lying in bed with Matthew's arms around her. "I cannot do this anymore. Every time I think I am helping, someone dies. I am finished." "All right," Matthew said simply, holding her closer. "All right. You have done enough, Bethany. You have given more than anyone could ask. It is time to let someone else carry the burden." But stepping away was harder than Bethany expected. People still came to her for help, still asked her to translate, to mediate, to explain one side to the other. She helped when she could, but she limited herself to low-risk situations, to written translations and conversations held safely in town. She would not go back out into the field, would not stand between armed men again. The school became her primary focus. By 1888, she had 30 regular students and had to hire an assistant teacher, a young Cheyenne woman named Rain Cloud who had been educated at a mission school and spoke 4 languages. Together, they built a program that was gaining attention throughout the territory. Marcus was 10 now, already talking about being a rancher like his father. He was good with horses, patient and intuitive, and he had Matthew's steady temperament. Lily was 6, bookish and thoughtful, always asking questions about why things were the way they were. In 1889, Montana became a state rather than a territory. Miles City celebrated with a big festival, and Bethany watched from the ranch house porch as fireworks lit up the sky. Matthew stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "We made it," he said quietly. "We survived all of it and came out the other side." "Some of us did," Bethany said, thinking of all the people who had not made it, all the lives lost in the long conflict between cultures. Because of people like you, Matthew said, turning her to face him. Bethany, I know you think you did not do enough, that you failed somehow. But look around. Look at our children who speak 2 languages and understand 2 cultures. Look at your students who are learning to see each other as human beings first. Look at this town, which still has problems but where people are at least trying to understand each other. You helped build that. Bethany leaned into her husband, letting his words wash over her. Maybe he was right. Maybe her small contributions had mattered in ways she could not fully see. Duncan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1891 at the age of 68. He had lived to see his grandchildren thriving, his daughter happy, and the territory he had loved become a state. Bethany mourned him deeply, but took comfort in knowing he had lived a full life and died content. She inherited the trading post and continued running it alongside the school, with Rain Cloud taking over more of the teaching duties. The town had grown substantially, no longer the rough frontier settlement it had been when Bethany first stood in the middle of a dirt street and begged armed men to see reason. Marcus grew into a young man who looked like his father but had his mother's gift for understanding people. He worked the ranch with Matthew, building up the herd, and at 18, he married a Cheyenne girl named Morning Star whose family had a small spread adjacent to theirs. Bethany watched her son's wedding with tears in her eyes, grateful that he had found someone who understood all the pieces of who he was. Lily became a teacher herself, working alongside her mother in the school. She had her grandmother's quiet strength and her father's steady presence, and she was brilliant at reaching children who struggled with traditional education. In 1895, Bethany stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set over the Montana grasslands. She was 41 years old, her hair showing the first threads of gray, her hands weathered from years of work. Beside her stood Matthew, now 49, his own hair more gray than brown, the scar on his shoulder a faded line that still made Bethany's heart clench when she saw it. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, taking her hand. "How far we have come," Bethany said. "Do you remember the day we met, when I was standing between those 2 groups of armed men, certain I was about to die? I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Matthew said. "I remember knowing I had to help, that I could not let you face that alone. I remember falling in love with you right there in that dusty field." "I was terrified," Bethany admitted. "Brave and terrified are not opposites," Matthew said. "Being brave means being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. You taught me that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Inside the house, they could hear Lily preparing supper, humming a Lakota song Bethany had taught her as a child. In the distance, Marcus and Morning Star's house glowed with lamplight, and Bethany knew her first grandchild would be born within the month. "You have any regrets?" Matthew asked quietly. Bethany considered the question carefully. She thought about all the times she had stood between angry men with weapons, all the nights she had lain awake worrying that she was not doing enough, all the people who had died despite her best efforts. "I regret the lives that were lost," she said finally. "I regret that I could not save everyone, that I could not make people understand each other as well as I wanted, but I do not regret the trying, and I do not regret a single moment with you." Matthew pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you, Bethany Brooks. I loved you the first moment I heard you speak, standing in that field with your hands raised and your voice steady, trying to save lives. You are still the bravest voice I have ever heard." Bethany turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his weathered face. "I love you too. You have been my anchor, my strength, my home. I could not have done any of it without you." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other in the midst of conflict and built a life of peace together. Marcus and Morning Star's son was born 3 weeks later, a healthy baby they named Duncan Matthew Brooks in honor of both his great-grandfathers. Bethany held her grandson and felt the circle complete, the legacy continuing. The years that followed were full. Marcus and Morning Star had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son. Lily married a teacher from Helena, a kind man named Robert who shared her passion for education, and they had 2 sons. The school continued to grow, eventually requiring a proper building that the town funded. Recognizing the value of what Bethany and Lily had built, Matthew and Bethany grew old together on their ranch, watching their family expand, watching the world change around them. The wild frontier of their youth gave way to civilization, railroads and telegraph lines connecting Montana to the rest of the country. The conflicts between settlers and native peoples did not disappear, but they evolved, took on new forms. On a warm summer evening in 1910, Bethany and Matthew sat on the porch swing he had built for her 30th anniversary. She was 56 now, he was 60. Their bodies ached more than they used to, moved slower, but their love had only deepened with time. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Bethany asked, her head resting on Matthew's shoulder. "When you told me I was brave." "I said you were the bravest voice I had ever heard," Matthew replied. "And I meant it. I still mean it." "I was just trying to keep people from killing each other," Bethany said. "Exactly," Matthew said. "You were standing between 2 groups of armed men, neither of whom trusted you, both of whom were ready to fire, and you spoke with a voice that made them listen. That made them see each other as human beings instead of enemies. That is not just brave, Bethany. That is extraordinary." Bethany smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle around her like a blanket. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Matthew agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was a scared 18-year-old coming west with my father. You gave me that, Bethany. You and the family we built together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had loved and fought for and helped to shape. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "I want you to know," Bethany said quietly, "that I could not have done any of it without you. Every time I stood between angry people, every time I tried to make peace, I knew you were there. I knew you would protect me, support me, love me no matter what. That knowledge gave me the courage to keep trying." Matthew turned to look at her, his gray eyes still as steady and kind as they had been the first day she saw him. "We protected each other. We supported each other. We loved each other. That is what marriage is supposed to be." "Then we succeeded spectacularly," Bethany said, reaching up to kiss him. The kiss was slow and sweet, flavored with decades of love and partnership. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Come to bed," Matthew said, standing and offering her his hand. "Tomorrow is another day, and I want to spend it with you." Bethany took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Together, they walked into the house they had built, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, just as they had faced every day for the past 34 years, together. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the grand gestures or the dangerous standoffs or the lives saved, though those were important. What mattered was the quiet moments, the daily choice to love and support each other, the family they had built, and the legacy they would leave behind. Marcus took over the ranch fully, when Matthew's arthritis made the work too difficult. Lily became the head mistress of the school, now a respected institution that educated children from across the region. The grandchildren grew up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable moving between the different worlds of their heritage. When Matthew passed away in 1918 at the age of 68, Bethany held his hand and told him she loved him one last time. He smiled at her, the same smile that had made her heart race when she was 22, and whispered, "Bravest voice I ever heard. Loved you from the first moment. Love you still." Those were his last words, and Bethany carried them with her for the remaining years of her life. She lived to be 73, passing peacefully in 1927, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the legacy of understanding and bridge building that she and Matthew had started. At her funeral, Marcus stood before the gathered crowd and told the story of his parents' first meeting, how his father had seen his mother standing between armed men and known instantly that she was someone extraordinary, how they had built a life together based on courage and love, and the fundamental belief that people could understand each other if someone was brave enough to help them try. "My mother always said she was just a translator," Marcus concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "But she was so much more than that. She was a bridge between worlds, a voice for understanding, and a reminder that love can transcend any divide." And my father, he was the steady ground beneath her feet, the support that allowed her to do the terrifying work of standing between angry people and making them see their common humanity. Together, they changed this part of Montana, made it a place where people like me and my children could exist without having to choose which half of ourselves to be. The crowd, a mix of white settlers and native people, cowboys and farmers and teachers and ranchers, all nodded in agreement. Bethany Sinclair Brooks had indeed been extraordinary, and her legacy would live on in the countless lives she had touched, the students she had taught, and the family she had raised to carry forward her work of building bridges and speaking with a brave voice for understanding. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Bethany and Matthew were together again, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had built, content in the knowledge that they had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world a little better than they had found it.